Welcome to the Children's Tradition Podcast, where we introduce families to the poetic life. Hello, everyone. My name is Patrick Foss. I'm here with my lovely wife, Amanda Foss. And we're blessed to be here with a special guest here today with us by the name of Mr. Trae Bailey. He's the content editor at Fraternus, and he's a lover of poetic knowledge, the poetic mode, and deep things. He values having a really deep and an enriching soul. And he's also a very dear friend of mine. So Trae Bailey, welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Patrick and Amanda. It's very good to be with you.
Wonderful, wonderful. I feel like we've been having a lot of these conversations just sort of preemptively behind the scenes, sort of leading up to this, where I feel like it was just a couple months ago. We just need to record a conversation because they've just been really rich, and they've been more blessed than me because, like I said, every conversation I have with you, I just feel motivated and excited just to pursue life to the fullest.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. And I always really appreciate when I see your name come up on my phone, because you're one of the few people, it turns out, who still make phone calls. And I think I'm one of the few people who still answer them. So it's good that we know each other, so that we can at least support each other in that apparently very old-fashioned sort of way of communicating.
That is true. You know, I am somewhat old school at heart. I rather despise texting, especially long conversations. And so just picking up, and you're one of the few people, like I said, you will pick up on the spot, because I will just call sort of I don't let you know. It's just sort of, my wife likes to say I'm impulsive when it comes to phone calls, just on the spot. Like, I'll be like, oh, I got to think of this thing. I'll just call him right now on the spot. She's like, you know, he may be with his family. I'm like, he doesn't have to answer. You can always get back to me. So
it's the only way to be. I think they're going to come back. I think phone calls, I think we're ahead of the trend here.
That's absolutely true. So, well, wonderful. Well, again, thanks so much for joining us. And I'd love for you just to kind of open up. And I know that some of our audience is already familiar just with your work. I know I became first familiar with you when you did your interview with Autumn Kern on The Commonplace, and just talking about fatherhood. And I know that's just a shared passion of ours, right? Both just want to invest into fathers and doing that work and all of that. And so, but I think it'd just be helpful if you don't mind just opening up and just sharing about you, what you're passionate about, what drives you, and what excites you.
Yeah, happy to. And we do have to thank Autumn for making this connection here, because I first encountered the work of your wife, and of course all the work you were doing at that time behind the scenes. Now very much working hand in hand with her on your beautiful curriculum, which we're very grateful for. This is something that my wife and I have started applying in our own home. And so, yeah, it's just beautiful to see all these things coming together. You guys being all the way at the moment in California. I say at the moment because I am secretly working to recruit you to the Southeast to join our homesteading community that we're trying to pull together. But all things in good time. We need good people on both coasts and in between. But yeah, I guess to go all the way back to the beginning, I'm the father of 6 children, thanks to being the husband of my beautiful wife that we just recently celebrated 16 years together. So we're high school sweethearts. So we dated before we left for college, and then we got married our junior year in college. So still very much an advocate of when you meet the person that you want to marry, that you make that happen and that you start your life together. Although some people will kind of raise an eyebrow when they notice that all of our kids seem to be all very much sort of packed into these sort of most recent years, in terms of our oldest being 8 and our youngest being 3 months. That can happen for a lot of different reasons. For us, it's mainly because we're converts to the Catholic Church, which is a whole story in and of itself, but certainly required some reordering of a lot of things in our life, including some ethics around begetting and bearing children. But nevertheless, God had a plan, and here we are. So now we have all these kids, and we sometimes feel like that little old lady who lived in the shoe, the one. And so, but thanks to people like you, we're figuring out what to do. We had some good people in our lives who set examples for us. I was homeschooled at least up until high school. So I had some background with that. But it really wasn't until 8 years ago when our oldest son was born that I started thinking more about my responsibility here, primarily as a father and what that meant in every area of life, but certainly in the realm of school.
Yeah. It's amazing how children can do that, right? I remember
Mhm.
when we had our first child now 10 years ago. It's amazing how time has fast. Where that that really sort of expedited me taking things more seriously. Not that I didn't take them seriously at all, but it was sort of a fast pass. Like, you need to grow up really more, and especially as they started to reach right into the nursery years and things like that, it just really caused a really spark in me that I need to take these matters seriously. My role, right? My engagement, my investment, and particularly within the realm of education. And so children absolutely grounded really both of us as well. You were already more mature than me, but that definitely helped us.
No, I mean, I know obviously scripture doesn't use this exact language for men, but I know when it talks about women being saved by childbearing, I feel like that's what happened. I had children and they saved my soul.
Yeah, no, most certainly. Now, you'd mentioned that obviously homeschooling was an upbringing for you. Was it a classical education upbringing that you had?
Well, I mean, in some senses, yes. In that, I grew up in a Christian home, and so I had the great benefit of having a mother who, thought very carefully about the things that she brought into our homeschool. Um, but so it was with my father. I remember a lot of our time was spent with my dad in his capacity at the time as a full time Protestant minister. Something he still does part time, by the way. But growing up, so, as a PK, as they say, as a pastor's kid, was exceedingly, it had a lot to do with how we spent our days, because I knew day in and day out that my father was doing a certain type of work that was meaningful. And a lot of that work took him into people's homes, visiting the sick, visiting those who were, needed shut-ins, elderly people. So a lot of our time was spent, especially as I got older, probably on into second grade and onward, going with my father to do things like that. So to some degree, my mother and father, whether they knew it or not, they were sort of ahead of the idea that homeschooling should be very much integrated with the rest of life, and it shouldn't be this sort of thing that's siloed off from everything else that you do. So on the one hand, they did that because that's what a preacher's family, for us, that's what we did. But on the other hand, when you have a handful of kids, I was the oldest of four. Your kids, to some degree, have to do everything with you, especially being a preacher's family, Southwest Virginia. We didn't have certain luxuries that maybe other people enjoy. So wherever my parents went, we went with them, which I think had a lot of influence on the way we were educated, because we did a lot of our schooling sort of not just in a classroom per se.
Was school something you enjoyed?
Yeah, I think it was something that I enjoyed. Although I have a very clear memory of the first time my mother gave me a big goose egg on something that I was working on. She just wrote a big 0 on there. And I was just shocked. I was like, you cannot do this to me. Like, how dare you? But that's important, learning how to fail, learning how to do something incorrectly and receiving correction. I was the kind of person, and I guess in some ways I'm still like this, these habits are deeply ingrained, and in some ways I've tried to overcome them. But I was the person who, really enjoyed the things that I liked, and I put a lot of time and energy and effort into those things. And the things that I didn't, I seemed perfectly willing to just write off as, well, it's probably not worth my time in the first place. I was that way all the way through undergraduate school, and I really didn't grow up. And we were talking about growing up. I really didn't mature as a student until I went to graduate school, which I don't think I'm alone in that. I think a lot of men in particular. Having known my wife since high school, it shocked her how little I could care about certain things when it came to school, and how much I could excel and do really exceptional work in other areas. It very much confused her as to why there seemed to be this difference between the two.
What age were you when you went to graduate school?
Well, I was older. So let's see. Hmm. I was probably 30, 31. Yeah. So, some of my, well, a lot of my colleagues were fresh out of graduate school. So that probably helped, for sure. And it also helped that I had two kids.
Well, I'm always interested to see where people fall, like in the ages of man scheme, right? Because in that scheme, adolescence goes up into the late 20s, right? And so it's interesting to think that, was it Socrates, right, who said that you shouldn't teach logic until someone is in their late 20s, around that age, right? But just that idea of like, there's just not a preparation, like there's a necessary preparation of mind and development that has even from things like marriage and children, but even just growing older, that prepares you to actually be able to think truly rationally, I guess, which is interesting. The difference between the adolescent, more eros-driven person versus the youth who still has that impulse, but also is more grounded in real things because of they're slowly gaining that life experience. So I don't know. That's interesting to me. I'm always interested when I feel like a lot of people will say that in their late 20s, early 30s is when a big shift happens.
Well, they say the mind is actually kind of, in terms of like formation, it like really becomes concrete at 25. So, and that seems to be an age too, that, like I said, people just, there's a level of maturity that is accrued at that time, and just level of seriousness about reality, about life. And so that age range seems to be appropriate. So now I am curious with you. So I know one of the things that you and I especially connected over is our love of, really all of our love of John Senior, and the work of IHP, Poetic Knowledge. And you've been rather a very loud advocate, somebody who's gotten information out, done interviews, have done the research that you have done on that program is incredibly impressive and so informative and really, really helpful to what they've been doing. And so I'm so grateful for that work that you've done. But I'm just curious, how did you become familiar with that work? And what was it at the core of that really captured your heart and mind?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot to say there, but, it really came down to finding reference to John Senior in a book by Stratford Caldecott. And, as someone who really enjoys following up on footnotes, and then as I like to talk about perhaps later, I'm also somewhat of a hoarder of books. So I immediately when I find something in a footnote that I'm interested in, odds are, I'll probably find myself either putting it on a list where if I'm out and about, I'll look for it in a used bookshop or a thrift store, or if it's something really pretty obscure, I've been known to just go ahead and spend more of our budget than we set aside on books. And so
sounds like our budget as well.
There are worse ways to fritter away one's money. The important thing is that you don't just simply hoard them, but at some point you either crack them open, or as I've been able to do now later in life, actually have these books on hand when we get a curriculum like your own. And I can run around and say, I've got that book, I've got that book. Why? Because I've spent the last decade, collecting these things. And that was actually a really fun night when we were sitting down to plan for the year, and we were looking at the book list from the children's tradition. My wife could tell that I was very excited, that I knew that I had, the large majority of them, only because we've been collecting them for so long. So you asked me a question, and then I got off on a tangent about buying books, but I guess it had to do with John Senior. So how did I kind of get involved with learning about him and that program? There's the footnote, and then there was getting his two books. So the two books that people are going to immediately discover if they start doing any sort of looking into his work are going to be The Death of Christian Culture, and the sequel of that, the Restoration of Christian Culture. And so I bought those, and I read them pretty much back to back. Couldn't put them down. And did I understand everything that I was reading? No, but certainly the way he was writing and sort of the I don't know, there was a sense of urgency about the things he was talking about, and he was describing a lot of the things that I had yet been able to really articulate myself, but fears and concerns that I had about, raising a family in a world that seems to be completely devoid of meaningful culture. And so for him to talk about that and then also chart some path forward out of it, was just really refreshing for me. And so then, I just sort of, I kind of, going back to something I mentioned earlier, allowed that very excited, almost sort of obsessive part of my personality to just decide that I was going to go whole hog on this thing and really, really look into it and figure out not only what John Sr. was all about, but what his program was about. And then if any way, find some people who had studied under him or had otherwise, been in contact with him during the time that the program was in operation. So all of that sort of led me to this manuscript, which is accessible online, and it's something that, if you do a little bit of digging, you can find. And I had printed it out and read it several times over. It's basically a description of the Integrated Humanities Program. And I'm presuming that a lot of people who are following along with the children's tradition know a thing or two about this. But Dennis Quinn, who was one of the other professors, wrote this manuscript essentially as a marketing brochure. So think of just a beautiful letter written in calligraphy with beautiful language describing what it would be like to be in the program. And at the end of that letter, he said, if you'd like an opinion on this program, feel free to phone any of the people below, or something to that effect. And there's this list of students' names and their phone numbers, as well as some parents and their phone numbers, people who I guess had, offered to field a phone call, back in probably 74, 76. And I had looked at this letter probably a half dozen times. And one day I looked at it. I said, what? I would like an opinion on the program. So I started calling these phone numbers. As you can well imagine, almost all of them were landlines, long since disconnected. But two people picked up. One was an elderly gentleman who, I'm not saying this in any way other than I think it's a fact that he was 100 some years old. Right? Because if you think about him being the father of, he was just excited to talk to somebody on the telephone, and I was excited to talk to him. And after we chatted for a little while, he gave me his daughter's information so I could follow up with her. She was a student in the program. And then the other was a sister who I guess must have been living in the parents' home, and she was happy to forward me on to her sister. After following those leads and then interacting with a few other people that I figured out were affiliated with the program, I ended up talking to about a dozen alumni and interviewing many of them. And at some point, I'll have to publish those interviews or do something with them. 6 children ago, that this felt very doable. And hopefully now, with the work that I'm doing, I'll have some time to put some more work into that. But it's a story that needs to be told. And at the end of the day, I want to be able to tell that story in such a way, using the stories that I've received from these alumni, that would make any of them say, yeah, that was it. That's what it was like. If I can do that, then I'll feel like I've done it justice.
Right. Yeah, discovering John Sr. for us was like discovering a brand new well right in our backyard that had the clearest and purest water. That was just there for us to drink and to consume. And as we started to look into it more, similar, right? And especially as, it's so influenced the ideas behind the curriculum that Amanda wrote. As we begin to just kind of come in contact with people who maybe were directly involved or maybe just descended from students who were there, right? And it's family members connected or just friendships, the charitability, the generosity of the ideas, them just really championing us and just excited to dialogue with us about this. That's what's been most exciting for us is people want to talk as we've heard more about IHP and what it is. And it seems like there's this recovery, and which is amazing because at the core of this is the recovery of realism, right? It's the recovery of becoming a human. And there seems to be this actually sort of reconnection and restoration of IHP that's becoming even a little bit more common and popular that I find. But I know that's been our experience.
Well, absolutely. And just for anyone who's watching this video, if you don't know what the IHP is, that those three letters we keep saying, it's referring to the Integrated Humanities Program that was started by Professor John Sr., Dennis Quinn, and Franklin Neelick. So that was a program in the 70s that really is the brainchild behind the children's tradition curriculum, because they were humanities professors and they cared about recovering the truly human things through the poetic mode of learning, which of course is what we are trying to talk about all the time. Because while the IHP and poetic knowledge are so well known in the classical ed world, like as a footnote, kind of like you said, Trae, like someone asked me recently, like, how did you hear about John Sr. and the poetic mode? And I was like, well, I've been hearing about it for years. Like, it's like a footnote. People just thought, oh yeah, you know, Poetic Knowledge by James Taylor. It's like, it'll be a footnote in a book, like you saw. And yet the centrality of it, you know, that's our heart, is to bring it to the center and bring it to the forefront, because I think it answers so many of the questions that this generation is struggling with, and even some of the issues we've seen in classical education coming into it.
Well, and not only have we seen it as a footnote, but it also, it can sort of be presented as this thing, yes, you receive early on, but then you graduate from. Yeah. You no longer need it, right? So yes, it's foundational, but it's foundational for just the early years, right? And then it's not something you really necessarily need to maintain, right? You need to get onto the other things, analyzation, all these other forms, where that type of knowledge, right? Like I said, it's more primitive. Keep it there, but it's not something you bring with you, especially later on in your years of development.
Yeah.
So it's definitely, so yeah, but I would, how, in terms of, maybe I'll ask you this question, this could help in terms of poetic knowledge. What, did you have any familiarity with that prior to IHP, or what was sort of just your first interaction with it?
I mean, no, not in terms of, you know, just the term itself. I mean, I think, you know, there's certainly, I guess you could say, you know, once you encounter the idea and you start to learn about it, you can, through reflection, recall your own experience and say, okay, yes, I know what that is. I felt that, I've experienced that, I've seen that, I've heard that, I've tasted that. And so, you know, that is, again, one of the ways in which reading the works of John Sr. can help you really just put words to things that you've been thinking or feeling yourself. And so, in so much as he taught me a lot of new things that I did not know, he gave words to things that I just need to be reminded of, which, depending on how much you want to lean into Plato, maybe that's all this whole education thing is on about. But anyhow, one way or the other, if I could go back to just sort of thinking about my own experience being homeschooled, and it doesn't have to just be in the homeschool. I mean, in so many ways, all parents are homeschooling, right? Because, you know, whatever's going on in your home, that is, you're leading your children somewhere. And so, first and foremost, I think we should all just take responsibility for that. And then if you want to take that responsibility on in a more formal way, in a more structured way, you know, there are wonderful curriculums out there. Like I'm supposed to push your curriculum 25 times. How much did I forget how much.
Yeah.
How much did we agree to?
Time, right?
That's right. Okay. Well, I haven't been keeping tally marks, but the children's tradition, you know, gives you that framework. But whatever the case, it really starts with a recognition of your responsibility, which is rooted in your identity, right? So if we could turn this conversation more directly towards fathers in particular, that's the thing that I kind of woke up to, was my responsibility towards my son first, and then later on all of my children, that I had to give him something, right? And that I was going to give him something. And even the act of sort of thinking that I could avoid that is giving him something, right? There's really no way around it. And so the metaphor that came to my mind at the time, you know, this was 8 years ago. So for anyone who's listening, I'm still very much in this, right? Still very much in the valley of diapers, as one person once told me, which is a very accurate, although very disturbing metaphor. But it's true. But they've told me that you're not always in that valley, that there is a way out. So we can look forward to that. But what I realized was that I had to build this house for him to live in. and I had to provide the foundation and the walls and the roof and the windows and all of that. And I knew that he would, and they do this in different ways throughout the course of their life. I know in part because I did it myself, but also I interact with other men who have children much older than mine. They're going to look at that house and they're going to have certain ideas about it, certain judgments about it. They're going to want to test it, right? And they may even want to deconstruct it, right? This is where, I think we need to just recognize that this is something that we all do. We all receive what we have, and we kind of put it to the test. Or if we're boys, and presumably women do this in their own way, we kind of pick it apart and pull it apart. And sometimes we do that mindlessly, and sometimes we do that intentionally. But one way or the other, we're going to put strain on this thing that we've received. And the hope is that at some point, the child recognizes the value of the thing that he's been given, right? And there's going to be some damage done, right? But that he then starts the process of restoration so that he can hand it on to the next generation, And so knowing that my son was going to do that, because I did that with my own parents, I wanted to think really carefully about the bricks of the house, let's say, that I received. And so that got me going back, being deeper in sort of my own tradition that I received from my family, looking at that with a more charitable way of looking at things. And then realizing that I was going to have to, at some point, really stand in defense of a lot of those bricks that I know have a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in them, not only for me, but from generations going back to the dawn of time. And so figuring out how to do that. Those are some heavy thoughts for someone who was just holding an infant. And not everyone has those thoughts when a child is brought into their home. I would say that I was blessed in the sense that I was burdened with those questions. But I'll also say, it's not like I was just sitting around just thinking these thoughts. I also went through a period of I don't know if you would call it depression or just it was a type of death to myself, and I didn't really know how to interpret that. It wasn't just the heaviness of the responsibility. I think it was also realizing that I had to give up a lot of the things, a lot of my selfishness. I had to realize that I couldn't just do whatever I wanted whenever I wanted to do it. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, man, you should have died to all of that the day you got married. But some of us take time and some of us require holding a little infant in our hands.
Some of us require multiple of them.
Yeah, that's right. Multiple, that's right.
Not just one. We need a lot of them.
You need to die to myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, you're right.
Wow. So, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, listening to you talk, you're really hitting on something that I think is important, because so often as parents, we think that the most important thing is the teaching, right? Oh, well, I have to teach them all of these things. And what you're getting at is that before we ever teach our children anything, there is this house that is being built that is atmospheric, that is pre-rational and post-rational, right? It ends up being both, but it's certainly pre-rational, it's intuitive, and that is the substance of poetic knowledge. The poetic mode is all of those things that are in the air of your home, that whether or not you've named them, like you said, everyone has the poetic experience of their family life. And that's right. Sometimes that's a good thing and sometimes that's a bad thing. And yet, kind of like you're saying, what's so interesting about that is you could teach a lesson and completely maintain your pride and your hubris, right? We could stand above our children. We can teach them, this is what the Bible says, and lay it down for them in anger or frustration or whatever it is. But what you can't fake is the poetic mode, because it begins with humility. And like you said, when you're doing that, it literally feels like a crucifixion of your ego, because to actually cultivate an atmosphere of love and of wonder requires a death of yourself. And it requires a laying down of all that so that true wonder and true humility can actually breed love for our children and for us with our children as we encounter the good in all these created aspects.
Right. Well, and it goes back to our first loves, right? So much of the recovery, we can all go back to that thing when we were a child, of that thing. I was in love with that, right? That captured me. Certain things we probably could look back and go, probably shouldn't have liked that as much. But then there's other things to say, that was a good thing. That was a normal thing. That was a real thing that felt, to love it, to know it, was enchanting. It had a sense of wonder and a sense of magic to it. And I think part of it is, there's the humility component, but the reason why it's a crucifix, because it's reordering how you love, actually how you know something, how you embrace something, and then how you actually just love people holistically, right? And so that itself, right, it's such a hard thing. I was just reading St. Maximus the Confessor as he's talking to a young student, and he says, how do I know God and love man? And he says 3 things: love, self-mastery, which is dying to self, and prayer, right? Is the way that actually you recover yourself of fulfilling the 2 great commandments of piety, loving God and loving man. But it is a form of death, to your guys' point. It is a form of crucifixion within the heart.
Man. Yeah. I don't know how, anyone could go into it, without learning that lesson. And I am learning it. I mean, I'm in the midst of it. So I don't want anyone to get the impression that, it's all just, a bed of roses. As soon as you rediscover certain truths about reality. Because it turns out when you discover those truths about reality, they stand in judgment over you. And that is really painful. It's really painful. Mainly because you realize that you don't know pretty much anything. And the little things you do know is because somebody in your life loved you enough to pass those things on to you in some way, either through an example or through, something that they taught you directly. But you owe a debt now to all those people, which maybe you didn't realize. So now you got to figure out how to respond to that. And so, and plus we just live in a world, I think at some point, Patrick, you mentioned sort of adolescence, and we live in this world of extended adolescence, and it's too easy to just not accept that responsibility or not accept the burden or the pain of responsibility and just avoid it. You can do that, and presumably you can do it for a pretty long time. I think it catches up with you eventually. But for those who want to take it on, willingly, in part, they do that because of the beauty that they see and the truth that they see and the goodness that's there. But it's absolutely picking up a cross. Don't get us wrong about that.
Well, and this is why, we need something to conform to, right? I think of, as David Hicks talks about norms and nobility, the ideal type, right? We need that model, right? That we have to look to, that shapes us and that molds us, something to follow. The problem is with the modern paradigm and approach to education, it's about self-discovery, right? It's about discovery of my own essence, right? My own personhood, about who I am, right? It's you look at the sort of shift of perspectives of, Socrates with Alcibiades is know thyself, have a proper perspective. Where as you get to modern man, with was it Ralph Waldo Emerson, where it's trust thyself, right? Thyself is pure, thyself is good, right? Look inward, right? To discover actually what truth and authenticity, right? And all of that is. And so, but the idea of the ideal type is actually looking out. And to your point, this idea of the receptive mode, right? Which is so synonymous with poetic knowledge, and the poetic mode is this idea of receiving. Right, this idea of receiving, that if I'm actually receiving something, that then cultivates a form of piety, right? That I need to show a sense of honor, a sense of respect, a sense of love to that very thing I've received. But that whole parasite, I decide what I do, right? I don't receive, I decide what I do. I make the law, right? I decide the outcome, rather than I receive this thing and then I conform to it and I show gratitude and I show honor to that thing that's been given to me.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you're describing is why moms can have a hard time sometimes, because especially if we've encountered these ideas and we're thinking about education, and maybe we're thinking philosophically for the first time, and we're examining what we believe about man and how that's affecting the way we're presenting knowledge to our children and all these things, it can feel overwhelming as a mom, because it's like, okay, I'm learning all this as I'm pregnant, nursing a baby, now have toddlers running around, they're wrecking the place while I'm just trying to get through like a reading lesson, and all this like the craziness of life does not stop as a mom is learning all this about how to educate her children. And like you said, it can feel like reality is judging you at that point of like, oh, well, there's all this truth, goodness, and beauty somewhere out there, but I don't know how to bring that here. And now I feel behind. And so I guess that was such a central part of why we wanted to have you on, is to talk about how fathers can be involved.
Well, and I think for fathers, even you talked to that sort of that realm of reality. I think there's a lot of fathers who say, I don't even need to enter into that realm. And especially when it comes to education, that's my wife handles that portion, right? That's what the teacher does. That's what the other moms in the co-op or the program, they're integrated. They're a part of that. I oversee it. I provide some type of managerial oversight. But in terms of my active, I'm not involved in the details. That really isn't my responsibility. So you use the analogy of this idea of construction of a home, which I think is really fit, which is the caution. Every home reflects really a subculture, right? We've inherited beliefs, philosophies of life, right? Religious tradition, right? A style to life, manners of discipline, just a code of conduct, right? Of hobbies that we like, interest, all of that. Each home represents that. And so I would love, Trae, just to get your input. Where can fathers start, especially fathers who recognize, hey, I actually need to enter into that home, or I just need to help construct that home? Where do they start? Where do they begin?
Yeah. Well, I think what you described there, Patrick, is really the result of things being put into silos, and it's very easy for us to say, well, this is my work life, especially when one leaves the home to go do that thing, and you spend so many hours of your life and so many days of your life, really, in so many ways, separate from what's going on in the home. But if you don't realize that what you're doing is actually influencing the life of the home, especially in so much as, your kids do wonder what you're up to. And, the day will come. I know when, the kids will grow increasingly less excited when dad pulls back into the driveway. Right. And I think it has to have a lot to do with kind of who you are when you step out of that car, when you pull into the driveway, right? And there's a lot of reasons for men to be completely exhausted. There's a lot of reasons for men to have spent all day long solving problems, putting out fires, making things happen, telling people what to do, to go home. And, the only thing you really want in the world is some carbohydrates, a cold beverage, a chair, and just some peace and quiet. Like, I get that. I totally get it. And it's really difficult on a lot of days to not give into that, because it's so easy to do that. Especially if you have a woman at home who intuits that and understands that, and even comes to your defense, right? Says, "Oh, dad's had a hard day," and there's certainly a time and place to do that, right? Like, we have to do that for each other. But these ways of spending your life will turn into these habits, and eventually that just is how you spent your life. So I think anyone who's just thoughtful of that has already taken the first step to realize that, man, like, what I'm doing has to change. I have to in some way change my life, and that may require a little bit more effort on my part, or that may require me to do something in advance to kind of prepare myself for that shift in my day, right? Because I have certainly been guilty of giving all of my heart and my mind and the work of my hands to solving a lot of other people's problems in the world, and then not be prepared to do that when I get home. And that really is sort of a sad state of affairs. But that's the place a lot of men find themselves in. So I guess recognizing that is something that we're trying to deal with, because of the state of the home and the workplace and the economy. We've really got ourselves in a situation where it takes a lot of thought and effort to do something different, right? To change your life, because the structures of society are not such that is perhaps as natural as it was to people in past generations. You know what I mean?
Mm.
When men started working out of the home primarily, first in the factories and then the offices, it brought a lot of these very difficult problems into all the things we're talking about. But they're not insurmountable. They're not insurmountable. And I think even a little bit of effort every day will amount to quite a bit in the long run. Because it does matter that you're thinking about these things and then trying to be intentional about changing your life. So it would start with really just doing a what's the word I'm looking for? You just kind of want to take inventories, take stock of your life. Like, what am I doing? How am I spending my time? What can I take control of? Some things I can't control, some things I can. In what areas can I take on more responsibility? Is that going to be difficult? Undoubtedly. But it actually may be fun too. You may figure out that there are some things you can say no to. Like you can put up hedges around your time, whereas maybe in previous situations you would have been available 24/7, whatever, to anybody. And now you say, actually, no, there are some people that I am directly responsible for that I need to actually shut off all those other, alarms and buzzers and whatnot, so I can focus my attention there. And then I would want to talk. I'm just going to talk through what I've done and what I am doing. I would talk to your wife about what she needs and what her hopes are, what her aspirations are for the home. Because odds are you can support that if you really look into it and if you think about it. What I don't want to say is that you should just overlay like all of the things you do in the world of business onto your family. Like, that's not going to work out. Like, you can't just like call everyone to the conference room and then sort of just come up with some like spreadsheet to manage everything. But what I think you can do is I think you can apply some of your skills and some of your well-developed ways of thinking and problem solving in the life of your home. But it'll take collaboration with your wife, because the thing that my hunch is the thing that women sort of understand more intuitively is sort of the sacramental nature of the home and what that means. And then they need the husband to help enact that and help support that and kind of provide, very much like we do in the church, right? We provide the structures that, if you think about them in concentric circles, this is what John Senior does in the opening of, I think it's the Restoration of Christian Culture. You can correct me if I'm wrong here. But as it turns out, if we have this one true thing, like the presence of Christ in the Eucharist, if that's real, and we know that it is, then that calls us to responsibility to build a shelter, right? And to call priests together to serve in that religious capacity. And then those priests need a garden for food, and they need walls for protection. And before you know it, you just have all of civilization. So I think in the same way, you can think about your home in those concentric circles and just think, okay, is there one way that I can build out sort of another outer ring to support the thing in the middle, which is the family? Ultimately, it's bringing everyone into union with God. And if you can do that, start in those concentric circles, perhaps it'll seem less overwhelming. You shouldn't be underwhelmed by the responsibility, but you don't have to be overwhelmed.
Yeah, I like the idea of where you started with that, especially with ourselves, right? And understanding, especially as the man's the leader, right, of the home, right? We set the tone, right? We're the captain of the ship, right? We're going, right? We have the map of where it's going, and so it has to start with us, right? Of where do we need to change? And I was actually just this past week, I was with a group of men who are just part of our tutorial program that we're doing. And a lot of them, I would say pretty much all of them, none of them came from a homeschool background, classical background like myself. And this idea of homeschooling, particularly classical homeschooling, is very new to them. It's very foreign to them. But nevertheless, there's a hunger I'm seeing with men. I'm seeing a sense of ownership and a sense of responsibility. I need to be involved in this. I need to pursue this. I need to know where do I start? And I know one of the things that was so helpful even for me early on, knowing, okay, I tend to think of it like a food analogy, the idea of, providing this feast. And one of the things that I discovered early on, as I'm giving this feast to my children, not only was it nourishing to them, it was nourishing first off to me. Right? It was restoring me. It became a healthy diet for Trae. It was nutritional for my soul and for my heart and for my mind, that it gave a sense of order and evenness and balance to my soul as I was doing that. So yes, it's work. Change is hard, but it's also nourishing, this change. It's also restoration. It's also satisfying. It's also fulfilling, even though, yes, it has the difficulty. And there is, again, we go back to that sense of actually putting to death our desires. There's going to be moments you don't want to do that thing, right? You want to come home, you want to relax, and not that relaxing in and of itself, I'm saying is wrong and equates to slothfulness and idleness, right? But it is changing of actually how do we immerse ourselves as fathers within our home. And I think I also what you alluded to is finding those sort of open doors of entry of strength. For me, I didn't grow up with reading fiction. That was not of interest to me. I didn't end up, school was something that was a massive burden, and I loathed it, I despised it. There's a lot of adjectives I could probably give to my view of school. But particularly what I did love is in terms of being story form was cinema. It was film. That was something that always captured my imagination. So one of the things Amanda definitely leaned on with me coming in was use your love of film to help connect with your children, right? Mm-hmm. That becomes the entry point, right, of what I can use. And for me, talking about film, talking about cinema, different things like that was just a very natural thing. And then through that actually made me say, you know what, I need to read literature. I never read a fictional book, an actual fictional book, till I was in my mid-20s. I mean, that was just something that was like going to the moon. Why read it when you have Spark Notes? Now you have things like ChatGPT that people are going to use and things that expedite that even more. But actually, that story formation, that actually caused me to even go deeper to older things, older books, and then older almost anything, right? Art, music, right? Artifacts, whatever it may be, that then changed my palette. So whatever those entry and starting points can be, utilize those things.
Yeah. So my hunch is, I'm speaking sort of broadly here, but by and large, not a lot has changed in terms of the things that the men and women are drawn to. So men are by and large drawn outside the home to go out and to bring good things back to the home, right? And you better hand those things off to a woman, because it's not guaranteed that everyone's going to get a fair portion of that thing you brought home if you don't, right? Some man in my life often has this. He refers to the thing that the airline person says. I forget what they're called, where you have to put on your own air mask before you assist the other person. Obviously, that makes sense in that context, but it doesn't make sense necessarily in the home, right? Where you just get your food and you go into your corner of the room or your office and let everyone else fend for themselves. So. There is a responsibility there to bring the good things in the home, and there's a responsibility to make sure that those good things are then, in so many ways, multiplied, enhanced even, and then distributed. And so I guess that could be an interesting challenge to ourselves as men, which is just get really fired up about the idea of bringing these good things into your home. Because if your wife is talking to you about them, then, well, obviously she cares about it. Right. And she's bringing this to you because she knows, she's fully confident in your ability to go and get it. Right. So if your wife is saying, man, you know what, we just really need to, and maybe she doesn't even know why, but she just intuits that we need better books in our home. Go out and find some books, man, make it happen, and you'll probably enjoy it. Right. I collected books for a decade, and I didn't know why I was collecting most of them. I just trusted that these were books that we needed to have. And then that moment came when it's like, oh, this is why we have all of them, right? And now we're starting to get into them, and I'm reading a lot of them for the first time, right? So it's not the case that you have to have all of this. Yes, it'd be beautiful if we all received this kind of education growing up, but you can get it remedially, right, as you're giving it to your children, and then set them up to pass that on in a more confident and robust way for the next generation. Same is true with other types of things, various experiences, right? So, like it's probably going to be the man sort of driving the initiative to say, you know what? Yes, let's all get in the car and go do this thing. And I'm going to have to provide all the logistical support and do some things that I wouldn't usually otherwise do in terms of taking care of the children, to like bring this whole horde of people into this new environment to do this thing. But actually it's worthwhile to make that thing happen. And we can, share the stories later about how, that was a really difficult thing we did, but I'm glad we did it. And your kids will remember those things. So, my parents would take us all to visit older people in nursing homes. And there's a lot of reasons why that's probably a bad idea, to bring like a whole load of children into a home with a bunch of like very fragile old people. But as it turns out, it was good for them and it was good for us. And my parents sort of took on the difficulty of that responsibility to make that happen. But again, it's sort of the father who is taking on that responsibility to assist the mother in bringing the family outside of itself. Because it turns out that if you bring these good things in your home, then you have a responsibility to extend that beyond your family and to give that away. And so if you can work on that together, then, I think it's just, I think it's a life worth living. And I think it's something that your kids will grow up and cherish. And, in so many ways will rebel against at different points in their life. But at some point we'll realize, I think old mom and dad were onto something.
Yeah, that's what I so much love, and what captivated me by just this idea of poetic knowledge. Not only just how human it is, but just how liberating it is. In the sense that it doesn't feel like, hey, I got to check this box here. I got to check this, because there's so many ways to recapture your sense of humanity. There's so many ways to engage that, and to do that collectively, right? To this, a sense of plurality. Now, as I've mentioned, growing up, I wasn't homeschooled. I wasn't classically trained. But one of the fondest memories I have growing up as a child with my family was we would get in the car and we'd go out and drive in these sort of scenic routes, right? Whether out in the desert, whether out in the mountains. And my dad, loved just jazz music, and he would play just this jazz music, orchestra style music, whatever it may be in. And those moments were incredibly powerful, I remember, and moments that actually gave me a time just to pause, to reflect it, whatever age I was, especially at that time. But like I said, it definitely formed me and captured my sense of sight, my sense of imagination, that even early on in the process, with even like, okay, I need to give something with my children. I don't necessarily know what to do, but hey, I know what my father did for me. Let's get in the car. Let's throw on some music. And it's like, hey, I know a couple of these guys' names, like Mozart and Beethoven. I couldn't tell you why their music necessarily was so powerful and enriching, but nevertheless, I know their music is something we talk about today. So let's actually put this music on as we go for a drive. Those little things, just even like that, of how you start, of how you engage it, can be incredibly powerful. And then, like I said, they can really capture your child's imagination.
Well, to your point, Patrick, you just reminded me of something, that my dad used to do. So I remember reading, probably in, I don't know, maybe third grade, a book about Edison. And I just became obsessed with this idea of having, I learned that he had a little home laboratory as a boy in his closet, right? Because he was this child prodigy thing. And I was like, well, obviously I have to have that. So I started figuring out how to make that happen. Well, you're in third grade, you have no idea how to set that up. But who does know things? Your dad knows. And your dad is out in the world and can come home with really interesting things. And so he would bring these little things home. The thing that stands out in my mind for some reason is rubber cement. Like, he brought home a jar of rubber cement and he gave it to me. And, I had like this really rubber cement. I mean, just think about it. What a fascinating, thing, right? I'd never heard of this thing. And here it is. And actually, I don't think I've used it since. But nevertheless, I had it in my little, in my little laboratory in my closet, among other things. I remember he brought home a little microscope one day. I'm sure he found it at a thrift store, but it didn't matter, right? These little things that he would bring home because he was contributing towards the development of my little home, laboratory. And so that was very meaningful to me. So it's not just, taking your kids out places. Sometimes you can bring home even the littlest thing,
Right.
like a jar of rubber
Yeah,
cement.
my father, he used to go, when he was traveling when I was younger, the things he would bring home was these ancient artifacts called VHS tapes.
Sure.
Yeah, this seems like a distant memory bringing those things up, but yeah, every time he would come back and he would bring home these old like school monster films, like the old school Godzilla films, where they dub it over the voice and all of that. And then, this one film called War of the Gargantuas, and, the old like, serial Superman films with Christopher Reeve, George Reeves, the old show, all of that. Those things though actually gave me an appreciation for story. But even older story. I mean, if I was to throw them on now, you could see obviously there's some cheesiness, but I've actually shared those same type of moments, even with my own children. I remember we had a moment where I was thrown on, it was actually War of the Gargantuas. I remember Amanda saying, "What is this?" I go, "We are actually re-entering into my childhood. We talk about poetic knowledge all the time. This fundamentally is what poetic knowledge is." She's like, "I don't know if it's but nevertheless, it was a way to connect with my children of something that I received from my father. But yeah, I love this idea of what you go out, a father, right? A husband, they leave, right? They bring that back into the home, right? And then the wife beautifies it, right? She adds a sense of, right, just this taste and flavor and goodness. They beautify this very object that makes it even more tasteful, more delicious and more attractive.
Well, and I think a father plays a special role in freeing the wife to do that, because I know, this obviously probably has to do with personality, but I can so easily become driven by the to-do list. Like I see this to-do list, the one I wrote in my lesson plans, right? And I can feel the burden of, well, we've got to make sure we get all of this done. And so one of the greatest blessings that you'll do is you'll come in to say, no, what matters is the atmosphere of our home before anything, right? So he has always been the one to make sure that I am remembering that the baseline for us is maintaining an environment of love, an environment of beauty, and that not that the to-do list doesn't matter at all, but that he cares a whole lot more about the atmosphere he walks into than whether or not I got it all done that day. And I think that is a huge blessing for a father, even to just give his wife that blessing, for a husband to give that blessing to his wife of saying, I care about the most important things, which is the hearts of our children, which is, yes, sewing in these good stories and these experiences and having your back when you're having a hard moment, but ultimately we're in this together and we're going to stay on the same page that the first things come first. And the to-do list is not actually the first thing. While a necessary part of a homeschool, it is not the first thing.
Yeah. Well, that's it. And I think, in so many ways, fathers have opportunities to, make statements about things that really do stick with children. Like it's such a powerful ability that we have to essentially declare things, right? Like that is good, that is bad. And so, don't take that responsibility lightly. But don't also be fearful of it in the sense, well, I guess you should have a proper respect for it, but don't avoid it, right? Actually speak out. And, I'll take, the kids out someplace and, we'll go to a thrift store, right? Because this is just where we shop. But it's fun because in part I'm teaching my kids the value of things, right? Not everything should just be thrown away, and not everything should just be bought new. Like some things can actually, have been in someone else's home or have been in our home and we donate them. And there's a whole economy. That's a whole nother thing we could talk about. But you could also waste a lot of money and junk up your house at a thrift store. So, there's a ditch on both sides of the road there. But I do like to. I've stopped in recent years, but I used to collect a lot of neckties, and so I would be looking through the ties with my boys, and they would be picking ones out. And I said, "That is an ugly tie, right? I would never wear this tie. This, however, is a very nice looking tie." And it's the littlest things, right? And I'm convinced that they'll remember those little things. Just like you remember little details about things that your dad pointed out or the things that he brought home. We'll be driving around town, and our town, like a lot of towns, has been inundated with vape shops, right? And my kids know that, on occasion I'll smoke a pipe or have a cigar, but vaping is not a thing that is acceptable. And if I catch you doing it, it's like I told my high school students when I was teaching high school: if I catch you smoking in the bathroom, I'll be upset that you broke the rules. If I catch you vaping, I'll be disappointed, right? And so, there's this vape shop, and it has this really horrendous sort of exterior, like this I'm sure very trendy, sort of modern sort of, and like all my kids know, like that is the ugly store, because every time I drive by, I'm like, that is such an ugly store, right? But it's those little comments, those little remarks about, that start to shape their taste. And I think it's important that fathers take time out to do that.
We talk about that, just like the basic, like just levels of decency that we need. Like, hey, basic things, kids, you need to brush your teeth, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need to make sure you do these things, right? Maintain, preserve your hygiene. Like, don't wear that shirt, right? There's presentation. Yeah. There's little things like that. Where's that girl's mother? Where's that boy's father? But then there's just other things you remember of, like, so that's not how you throw a football. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's not how you shoot a basketball, right? That's not how you swing a golf club or you hold a rifle. Right, you paint a fence. Right, you chop wood. There's just basic things, right? Yeah. That this is what for us as parents, right? That you're training a child. And that, again, this gets to the essence of education, right? Where it's not vocationalism, right? But it's so much more that it's all about the cultivation of the human, right? Training them up, the paideia, right? Of bringing them up. So I'd love to ask you this final question, and that is, and this question we tend to present it sort of the opposite, in the sense of, hey, if you're a wife and you're trying to bring, your husband into this who's unfamiliar, where do you start? And I know that's a common question, definitely. I know both me and Amanda has addressed many times, but I actually I want to present it the opposite way. Let's say you're a father and you're being captivated by this idea of poetic knowledge, classical education, but your wife's not there, right? She's over here. And the idea of homeschooling just seems daunting. It seems incredibly burdensome. It seems frightening. It seems like I'm not qualified. I'm not equipped for that. Where does a father, where does a husband start with that to try to say, hey, I want to integrate this, but where do I begin to get my wife there?
Yeah. Yeah, that's important, because it can certainly be the case that one person in the relationship can be driving towards an idea, and for any number of different reasons, the other person in the relationship just isn't thinking along those lines, or perhaps because they haven't read the things you've read or listened to the podcast you've listened to, or maybe they just haven't received that sort of inspiration, for one reason or the other. I wouldn't lose hope. I would just, take a page out of. I'm sure there's a male saint that we could look to, but Saint Monica is the saint that comes to mind. Married to a pagan husband, had a very wild and how do you describe young Augustine? Sowing his wild oats and all the rest. But every day she served them. Every day she prayed for them, and in the end, her and her son are two saints, and her husband came to Christ, and that was largely due to her prayers and devotion, but also because of her daily acts of service towards them. Like, that was the thing that helped them realize, I think mom's up onto something. I think she's really figured something out here. And everything else, ends up being so empty and vain anyways, that her faithful, that's what it is. Her fidelity to the truth sort of convinced them in the end. So I guess that's what I would say is just be willing to really lean into those virtues, and to start to cultivate those fruits of the Spirit. Because if you're impatient, oh, that's pretty ironic. Or if you're hateful about it, you're like, why can't you just see what I'm seeing? Well, that's also pretty sad, right? There's a lot of ways in which you can actually counteract sort of the good that you're aiming at, because you're aiming at it in an inappropriate way. And so, having a desire for, it really is rooted in chastity, right? Only wanting the right things in the right way at the right time. But you have to be modest about it. You have to be willing to approach that in a way that is patient and gentle and kind. And if you can do that, my hunch is that, like a lot of conversion stories, it's not uncommon for, if a man and a woman are discerning coming into the church, it's not uncommon for the man to act first, right? Kind of like St. Peter, right? He just jumps out of the boat, right? It's like, let's do this thing. Like, it's a good thing. Let's make it happen. And, women tend to be, in some ways, rightfully and providentially, just slower, thoughtful, more cautious, probably because they understand what's at stake. Like, okay, this is a big change in our life we're making, right? You're telling me we're going to change everything about our life in terms of the way we think about faith, education. I mean, you just go down the list and we're just going to kind of make a change here. But when they do make that change, when that conversion does happen, usually there's a depth to that conversion that is so rich and so fertile, right? Understandably, that I think the husband in the end will be grateful that his wife has that sort of built-in sort of ability to slow down and to think very carefully and to actually, in so many ways, maybe the more I'm talking about, the more I'm thinking of different metaphors. Maybe just go back to like when you were dating and you think to yourself, okay, for most of us, it took us a minute, right, to like convince her, like, I'm the guy, like, let's do this, like, make this happen. But you're just persistent and you try to be, a gentleman, and you try to be, sort of like the knight pursuing his lady. If you do that, odds are it'll probably work out for you. So I don't know. You've got to fight that battle yourself, but that's been my experience.
Virtue and patience are helpful. Any comments that you would say maybe to that mom? This is brand new. They're coming in. The husband's excited, right? And they're thinking the weight of this is on me because I'm the one, right? In terms of with the children, right? On just sort of the hour by hour basis, right? What encouragement would you offer them?
Well, I would just say to them what you're always saying to me, which is to take baby steps and be okay that change takes time, right? I think especially if you have one person who's maybe has gone deeper into these ideas, that person could be the more enthusiastic one. And so then it requires patience, right? On that side to be like, and also that willingness to say, hey, I see that you just tried there. I see that you grabbed that book and read it to the kids. I see that you took the kids outside to look at the stars. I see that you went for the drive in the storm and, got to see the lightning or whatever it is, that like being willing to have eyes to see how your spouse is genuinely trying, I think goes a long way, because we all don't want to feel like we're just constantly failing, right? Which if you have these high ideals, it could be so easy to feel like, well, I'm just never going to live up to them. And so I think having eyes to see, I've just always been grateful for you with that when you're encouraging me of like, but look what we are doing. Because I'll so easily focus on, but we're not doing this. We're not doing, all the things we still need to do. And for him to come in and be like, but by the grace of God, here's what was beautiful today. Here's what was good today. And I think both spouses need that with each other, right? Like you said, to not look at if the other spouse is resistant, to not look at it as merely, oh, they just don't love deep things like me. Oh, they just don't love beautiful ideas as much as I do, right? And like a superiority complex, but rather to be like, no, maybe they're cautious for a good reason. Maybe, it could be good reasons on my part that maybe I've changed my mind about things a lot, or maybe it's with the ideas themselves that they just need more time to sit with them.
Or maybe you're presenting it too aggressively, that it makes them feel like they're going to drown. Life is, with anything with this, right? It can, there's moments where you got to grind things out. That is just a fact of life. But then there's other times, right, where I think just having that posture of patience, slowness, and affirmation of the baby steps is a good thing. And I think at the end of the day, if what we can give our children is good memories, good moments, and that's what they remember, rather than, well, Yeah, we did the big thing we put on the event, but it was war prior to that. But yeah, we put the thing on, but up behind the scenes, it was just turbulent and the waves were crashing, all of that. If we can give our children those moments, I actually think poetic knowledge becomes easier to maintain and easier to receive, because that was given to them and it was maintained.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, 1 Corinthians 13, I mean, it pretty much has it all laid out right there, right? Because we can have a lot of skills, we could have a lot of talents, we could have a lot of abilities, but if we do those things lacking love, then, I mean, we're really just making fools of ourselves and making a lot of noise and probably hurting a lot of people along the way. It's also the case, speaking of both parents, I've always been struck by the fact that, the prodigal son undoubtedly came from the best home life, the best homeschool curriculum, the best poetic knowledge environment, atmosphere, Charlotte Mason, out the wazoo, you name it. It was all there, right? And he didn't really realize that until he was sitting like with the pigs. It's like, oh shoot, maybe dad was onto something.
In your senses. Yeah,
So,
and the same can be applied to Adam and Eve.
well, yeah, I mean, exactly. This is a very old story. We keep kind of finding ourselves in the same situation, don't we? So I guess what I would say there is it's all still worth doing, even if, and I'm saying this to myself, even if at some point one of the kids or all the kids say, I just don't think that's for us. There were still seeds planted. There was still work done on the soul that in God's good time will bring a harvest, and it's still worth doing. So hopefully that's encouraging.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Well, Trae, I leave the final word with you. Any final comments? Anything you want to leave our audience with?
Well, you should do the children's tradition curriculum. Did I meet my quota?
That was not a setup for that, but
No, of course not. No, but you really should. You should enter into this world. As we start out the conversation, there's just so many people who are in it with you. Many of us are in that valley of diapers that I described earlier. We're certainly not, in so much as I probably sounded here and there like I'm dispensing advice. That's certainly not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to pass on the things that I've received that have been very beneficial and life-giving to my family. I know that's what you're trying to do. You received something and you took it into your home and you put it together in such a way that you could share it with other families, save them a lot of the work that you did to gather those things together. But that's kind of the work that has for a long time been presented to us by sort of the monastic culture of Lectio Divina, right? It's like going out like bees, collecting the pollen, coming together, digesting that, making the honey, sharing it. And I think in so many ways you guys have done that with your curriculum. So thank you.
Well, we appreciate it. Trae, where can people find you?
I would like to encourage people to look into the work of Fraternus. It's been something that I've been delighted to join in with in terms of especially working for men. So if you visit fraternus.org, you can see the work that's going on there in chapters all across the country and in some of the work that we've been doing with some online courses as well. I found it to be good work that I'm proud to do. And I know a lot of men's lives have been changed as a result of that apostolate. And then every once in a while, and I should get better at this, I'll throw up something on Substack at the Bailey Wick. So if you want to drop a link to that, then you can catch, again, a lot of what I do there is just collecting things, passing them on. Hopefully you'll find that they're helpful.
Wonderful. Trae, as always, a joy to chat with you. Thanks so much for hopping on and chat with us. We're so grateful you did.
It's my pleasure. God bless.